Yeah. All right, so we're going to continue with race first. I haven't been up on this in a couple of days, but we're going to go ahead and knock this fourth chapter off called religion. Um, as you already know, this is just part of my daily routine as far as readers are leaders. This is a challenge that I'm taking on myself, and I hope others take on. If they don't, I will. I just feel that a lot of people don't read, especially once they get out of high school, and a lot of people are intimidated to read because maybe they don't know how to read well or just don't have the time for it. But readers are leaders, and they always say if you want to hide something from a black man, put it in the book. Well, we're gonna change that because I'm gonna dig in every book and I'm gonna pull out all the information for all of the people. Well, this chapter 4. Please subscribe to my channel. Um, Likes, all that. You know what I mean? I need it all, and it's just out of love. This is chapter 4. Religion and race first. Religion. God in the affairs of men is on the side of the strongest battalion, Marcus Garvey. In spite of all the evidence, Negroes still believe that Garvey is not dead. What's wrong? Was he immortal? Was he not human and subjected to sickness and death like the rest of us? S.U. Smith, Treasurer, Harmony Division of Jamaica. In March 1917, the Chicago-based Champion magazine editorialized on the need for a religion that would inspire the black man to do for himself. It noted that, from a secular standpoint, both Booker T. Washington and Dr. Du Bois, with their different schools of thought, supplied it. Nevertheless, the article continued. Such faiths do not penetrate so deeply into the nature of a man as those inspired by his spiritual self. The editorial continued with an impassioned plea. The Negro is crying for a Muhammad, a prophet, to come forth and give him the Quran of economic and intellectual warfare. Where is he? An article by Garvey had appeared in this magazine 2 months earlier, and within the next 2 years, he would be on his way toward answering this plea. Garvey seems to have had frequent contact with religion during his early years. At the age of 7, he is supposed to have enjoyed affecting the role of preacher among his playmates. As a boy, too, he pumped the organ in the Wesleyan Methodist Church in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, the church to which his parents belonged. Garvey later converted to Catholicism, which did not deter him from following an independent line in things religious. Like many of the world's great revolutionaries and reformers, Garvey dreamed dreams, saw visions, and long before his dreams assumed worldwide importance, he was imbued with a self-conscious premonition of impending greatness. This phenomenon, coupled with his fascination for religion and religious ritual, gave his career messianic quality, which he himself was not reluctant to express. He was not loath to compare his own career to that of Jesus Christ. In doing so, however, he was attempting to recapture what he considered to be progressive and revolutionary essence of the early Christian church. As far as he was concerned, Christ was the leader of a mass movement for the upliftment of oppressed people, and so was he. This explains why he could be pro-religious and very often anti-clerical at the same time. Christ's doctrine, he explained, was simple but revolutionary. He laid the foundations of pure democracy and established the fact, not a theory, of the universal brotherhood of man. And just as he saw himself in the role of Messiah, so he saw his doctrine of black nationalism as one that would survive and thrive even in the face of persecution. A favorite poetic quotation of UNIA orators was the line, "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again." This spiritual aspect of Garvey's movement distinguished it from the more important contemporary movements with similar goals. The universal feeling of oppression and resentment experienced by black people at their worldwide subjection to colonialism and oppression cannot be overemphasized. Garvey's uncanny ability to encompass all this worldwide racial sentiment and the spectacular success with which he channeled it into organizational form released emotions of hope and appreciation among black people which knew no bounds. Garvey's followers and admirers regularly hailed him as the mightiest prophet who has appeared amongst us in 50 years, a great religious teacher, a John the Baptist. They regularly compared him to Christ. Like Christ, he had been betrayed for money and condemned by governments, and his gospel too will be preached to every nation and would precipitate an end to barbarism. One preacher wrote a book wherein he essayed to show that Garvey had brought the race, the UNIA, through the instrumentality of God. Garveyites from Cologne, Panama, seeking their leaders released from prison in the United States, informed President Coolidge that we, the Negroes of the world, would look upon Garvey as a superman, a demigod, and as the reincarnated angel of peace come from heaven to dispense political salvation to an oppressed people. Yeah, this message continued. We love Garvey next to our God. One New York division went so far as to canonize Garvey in his own lifetime after his expulsion from the United States. This tendency to apotheosize Garvey found expression in the words of the UNIA Creed. We believe in God, the creator of all things and people, and Jesus Christ, his son, the spiritual savior of all mankind. We believe in Marcus Garvey, the leader of the Negro peoples of the world, and in the program enunciated by him through the UNIA, the redemption of Africa. A similar creed found its way into a nationalist South African church. We believe in one God, maker of all things, father of Ethiopia, who did Athili, Marcus Garvey, and colleagues come to save the downtrodden children of Ethiopia, that they might rise to be a great power among the nations. It was consistent with this veneration that some of Garvey's followers at first refused to believe accounts of his death and had to be reassured that Garvey had indeed passed on but remained in spirit to share the joys and sorrows of his people. Garvey did not indulge in religion for its own sake, however, but used it as he did art for furthering his program of race pride and self-reliance. His political use of religion began by the simple argument that if, as established Christian churches preached, man was made in the image and likeness of God, then black men should depict a God in their own image and likeness, which would inevitably be black. Garvey pointed out that the practice of Western Hemisphere Africans to worship a god of another race have few parallels anywhere else. It was quite normal for people to visualize and depict their gods in their own color. Their foisting of a white god onto black people was therefore a white distortion. Garvey's close colleague, Bishop George McGuire, reinforced his argument by pointing out that Christ was historically reddish brown rather than white. And furthermore, should Christ visit New York, he would not be allowed to live on Riverdale Drive, but would have to reside in Harlem because of his color. Garvey reinforced this view by argument that because he came as an embodiment of all humanity and therefore was colored, Christ was persecuted. This facet of Garvey's thought, like most others, was taken to its logical conclusion. At a religious ceremony making the close of the 1924 International Convention of Negro Peoples of the World, Jesus Christ was canonized as a black man of sorrows and the Virgin Mary as a black Madonna. The convention also agreed to the idealization of God as a Holy Spirit without physical form but a creature of imaginary semblance of the black race, being of like image and likeness. Garvey explained that this did not mean that the UNIA was embarking upon a new religion. It was simply correcting a mistake of centuries. Garvey's black God elicited rebukes from a cross-section of the types of people who opposed his other programs. The pastor of the St. Philip's Colored Episcopal Church in Harlem considered the idea absurd. Garvey was, in his view, holding the race up to ridicule. One British Foreign Office official considered that this religious program beats the band. Another thought that Bishop McGuire seems to have got some of his ideas from Chartres. Professor Kelly Miller of Howard University agreed that God was equally as black as he was white, but thought that the remedy did not lie in the vindictive alternative of Marcus Garvey. A correspondent to the New York Times pointed out that Indians and Africans in Brazil had long depicted Christ as black, but minus what he had considered Garvey's racial animosity. Since religion for Garvey was eminently political, the black God of the UNIA differed from many other Christian gods insofar as he was a God of self-reliance. The God of the UNIA concerned himself with spiritual matters. He endowed all races equally and left them to their own devices to solve the problem of survival. It appeared as though Garvey, in view of his own religious background and mindful of the entrenched position of religion in the lives of black people, opted to channel this religious fervor into the path of racial salvation rather than attempt to fight it. Therefore, he incessantly repeated the message: we blame God for many things that he doesn't even know about. He was convinced that in a thoroughly materialistic world, mere religious precepts would not sway the hearts of those in power. He even jokingly suggested that he thought religion alone could win justice for the black man. He would be a bishop. Oh, he joked that if he thought religion alone would win justice for the black man, he would be a bishop. This difference between Garvey's religion and mainstream Christianity was not accidental. He considered white Christianity to be synonymous with hypocrisy and assailed black people for giving up the world to the white man for the dubious privilege of receiving Jesus. The white man has the world and gives up Jesus? Don't you know the white man has a right to Jesus too? Jesus belongs to everybody, so you are foolish to give up the world and take Jesus only. Accordingly, when during the annual International Convention of 1922 in New York, a white Bible society pretentiously offered free Bibles to delegates. The offer was declined with the suggestion that they be sent south to the races who dwelt in those parts, since all the delegates already possessed their own. The bitterness which Garvey felt toward white Christianity is eloquently summed up in a Negro World editorial he wrote in 1923. This is what he wrote. The Negro is now accepting the religion of the real Christ, not the property robbing, gold stealing, diamond exploiting Christ, but the Christ of love, justice, and mercy. The Negro wants no more of the white man's religion as it applies to his race, for it is a lie and a farce. It is propaganda pure and simple to make fools of a race and rob the precious world, the gift of God to man, to make it the exclusive home of pleasure, prosperity, and happiness for those who have enough intelligence to realize that God made them masters of their fate and architects of their own destinies. In 1937, in similar vein, Garvey described himself as a Christian driven from the church by such actions as the Pope's blessing of Italian fascists en route to their invasion of Ethiopia. And the black preachers who uncritically emulated their white counterparts, Garvey was equally hostile. He considered them of little help to the UNIA since they confined their activities mostly to preaching and collecting money. During his American period, Garvey's religious program was reinforced and often implemented by the African Orthodox Church, while the UNIA never adopted any specific religious denomination, Christian or otherwise. To the exclusion of others, the African Orthodox Church was the nearest approximation to such a state of affairs. The dominant figure in the AOC was George Alexander McGuire, a naturalized American, once a Church of England minister in his native Antigua and elsewhere in the West Indies, and later an Episcopalian and chaplain general of the UNIA. McGuire was ordained first bishop of the AOC on September 29, 1921, by a functionary of the Russian Orthodox Church after duly being reordained and elevated to the episcopate in the American Catholic Church in order to ensure apostolic succession. The Negro World extended its congratulations to Bishop McGuire on this occasion and reminded its readers that this was in keeping with the decision of its recent convention to endorse all churches under race leadership while not allying itself with any. Bishop McGuire resigned as chaplain general of the UNIA upon his elevation to the episcopate. Despite a tiff with Garvey, which caused Bishop McGuire to become temporarily estranged from the UNIA, the AOC played an important role in disseminating Garveyism in North America, the West Indies, Africa, and elsewhere. It was Bishop McGuire who wrote the Race Catechism used by Garveyites, in which faithfully reproduced Garvey's ideas on religion and religious history, as well as the fundamental principles of the UNIA. Garveyites, some high-ranking, played important roles within the AOC. In 1924, for example, a former Secretary General of the UNIA became Vicar General of the African Orthodox Church. During the United Synodal Service of the Fourth General Synod of the AOC held at Harlem's Liberty Hall in 1924, Bishop McGuire conferred with the honorary degree of Doctor of Civil Laws on Garvey. In 1923, with Garvey incarcerated in the Tombs prison in New York, McGuire was mentioned as a possible successor in the event that Garvey should be permanently denied bail. The AOC served often as a supplementary propaganda agency for the UNIA. The Negro Churchman, its official organ, regularly promoted such Garveyite ideas as race pride, colonization in Liberia, and the like. McGuire's editorials, Ex Oriente Lux, usually began churchmen of African descent greeting in Christ, which bore obvious similarity to Garvey's fellow men of the Negro race greeting. The AOC's activities in colonized territories proved no less embarrassing to colonial authorities than those of the UNIA itself, and indeed the two were sometimes represented by the same individual. An AOC clergyman who doubled as a UNIA head in Santo Domingo was reportedly deported from that country for insulting the British flag, while another, Evin Edward Sealer Salmon, was deported, according to the same source, from Trinidad to Jamaica for fomenting riots and strikes there and for stirring up workers in British Honduras against the United Fruit Company. The latter was Assistant Secretary of Trinidad Working Men's Association. The source of this information was a renegade AOC clergyman who took it upon himself to inform the British authorities of his church's activities. Among the gratuitous information thus proffered was the fact that the AOC had an ordained bishop, ostensibly of Canada, who would, in fact, preside from Nova Scotia over the West Indian sections of the church. It was feared that the title Bishop of the West Indies would cause the British colonialists to prevent him from entering the islands. Maguire told the AOC branches in the West Indies to change their name if molested by the authorities, if this would allow them to carry on their work. The AOC was similarly engaged in various parts of Africa. In 1924, an application for membership was accepted from an archdeacon of Pretoria, South Africa. Together with this congregation of 500, in accepting this application, Bishop Maguire is reported to have suggested that the archdeacon help effectuate Garvey's entry into South Africa, after which Bishop Maguire would consecrate him Bishop of South Africa. Shortly thereafter, from Griqualand, West South Africa, came word that an AOC clergyman intended to go to New York to attend the next international convention and to be elevated to the episcopate by Bishop Maguire. In 1929, a branch of the AOC was begun in Uganda by Reuben Spartus Mukasa, a nationalist politician who had for some time been in correspondence with Bishop Maguire and who was also an admirer of Garvey. In 1925, Maguire summed up his religious belief in a nutshell. I believe in God. I believe in the Negro race. And even though the UNIA was not a religion, he was sure that the time has come when we shall all espouse it as a great, all-comprehensive racial missionary movement, a holy cause to which every Negro should give undivided allegiance. Not unnaturally, UNIA meetings were characterized by religious overtones. They featured hymns, prayers, and sometimes processions, and every unit had a chaplain. Christian festivals such as Easter and Christmas were celebrated. Just checking this out. But in keeping with Garvey's reinterpretation of Christianity, they were turned around to the cause of Garvey's program. At a Christmas pageant at Liberty Hall in Harlem, for example, Christ was depicted as a black child. For the period before Easter, the UNIA produced its own moving picture to replace passion plays where white actors portrayed God. At Easter, Garvey made his annual speech on the resurrection of the Negro. Even the Christian practice of baptism had its counterpart, for the association's catechism stipulated that infants should be brought by their parents to be dedicated by the chaplain of their division, not later than 3 months after birth, at which time they enter the general membership of the organization. Garvey, the irrepressible, not content with being a poet and playwright of liberation, turned his hand also to political hymn writing. Among his religious verses there were cropped up inevitably such titles as Freedom's Noble Cause, 1834 to 1934, and lines such as Nevermore as Black Footstool, Nevermore as Black Footstool shall Afric's sons be sold. Garvey took his religious innovations seriously, and he and his colleagues were intolerant of religious cranks who were attracted to the organization. The UNIA is flooded with a bunch of eccentric religionists, said Negro World columnist S.A. Haynes of a lady who complained that the organization was godless. Garvey himself expressed disagreement with Father Divine, who proclaimed himself God, and his disapproval of the Jamaican folk religion, Pocomania, was in one instance surprisingly strong. He disapproved also of Jamaican prophets and prophetesses, I don't know how you say it, prophets and prophetesses, female prophets, y'all know how to say it, who are going to fly heavenward for the solution of the Negro problem. An apparent reference to the Jamaican prophet Bedward, with whom Garvey is on occasion somewhat controversially compared. On another occasion, Garvey declared, "They sent poor Bedward to the asylum, but they will have a hard time to send me there." As previously stated, the UNIA refused to exclusively adopt my single Christian denomination. This reluctance to split the race among denominational lines extended to the avoidance of distinction among religions. Though he adopted Christian forms for the UNIA, Garvey considered differences between religions such as Christianity and Islam inconsequential, since they were but different ways of worshiping God. An early copy of the preamble to the UNIA Constitution, enclosed in Garvey's correspondence to Booker T. Washington, had referred to the promoting of Christian worship. This gave way in revised versions to spiritual worship. This religious tolerance is interesting in the light of the rapid post-Garvey. This religious tolerance is interesting in the light of the rapid post-Garvey spread of Islam among African Americans. For the UNIA presented the budding Islamic movement with a sympathetic form. This tolerance toward Islam may have been indirectly due to Garvey's renowned predecessor in the cause of African redemption, Edward Wilmot Blyden. In his earliest extant pamphlet, Garvey carried a quotation from Blyden's Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race, which occupied about half of its few pages. The quotation itself dealt not only peripherally with Islam, but the book from which it was taken is a clear expression of Blyden's admiration for Islam. Despite Blyden's being a devout Christian, Blyden's favorable attitude toward Islam had also influenced John E. Bruce. Bruce had met Blyden, who died in 1912, and been planning a biography of him. In an address to the Boston UNIA in 1923, Bruce compared Christian and Islamic attitudes to the African race to the detriment of the Christians. Another possible source for Garvey's tolerance toward Islam may have been Dost Muhammad Ali, who was a prominent member of London's Islamic community. At the 1922 UNIA convention, several delegates suggested that the association should adopt Islam as its official religion since 3/4 of the black world were Muslims and Muslims were better Christians than Christians. Garvey, of course, refused to legislate on this matter. Some Negro world writers went so far as to occasionally compare Garvey with Muhammad. One such in 1925 compared the Prophet of Allah concentrating his inexhaustible incandescent energy on the spiritual material liberation of his people and the herald of the new dawn, Garvey, stressing with equal zeal the material spiritual redemption of his race. Another, in a paying of praise entitled Sing of Garvey, Glorify Him, Ye Myriad Men of Sable Hue, referred to him as a child of Allah. Even the organization's Universal Ethiopian Hymnal, compiled by Rabbi Arnold J. Ford, contained a hymn, Allahu Akbar, based on African lyrics. Among the Muslims who established apparently close contact with the UNIA during Garvey's American period were adherents of the Ahmadiyya movement, a Muslim denomination founded in northern India a decade or so before the end of the 19th century. In 1920, Dr. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, a missionary from this group, arrived in the United States. He purchased a property at 4448 South Wabash Avenue in Chicago, part of which was converted into a mosque and began, I don't know what that say, proselytizing, Proselytizing. I believe that's what it says. Proselytizing. By 1923, we find Sadiq among the guests on the rostrum during a Liberty Hall meeting. He had recently converted 40 Garveyites in Detroit, an area of intense Ahmadiyya effort. Sadiq returned to India in 1923 and was succeeded by Muhammad Yusuf Khan, also of India. Molvi Muhammad Din, Sadiq's successor as editor of the Ahmadiyya movement's Muslim Sunrise, reprinted pro-Muslim matter from the Negro world, which in turn carried his discourse, Has Christianity Failed and Has Islam Succeeded? Then appeared in the Negro world again in 1925, this time replying to a couple of editorials by T. Thomas Fortune, in which the latter disagreed with Blyden that Islam was preferable to Christianity. Fortune's argument rested on the alleged moral superiority of monogamy over polygamy and the ease of divorce in Islam. Then described as belonging to the Muslim Ahmadiyya mission, pointed out that illegitimacy and divorce among Christian monogamists undermined Fortune's argument. Fortune remained adamant, however. An associate editor of the Negro World favored the Muslim position, and even Fortune was by 1926 denouncing the high-handed way in which the Christian Americans and Europeans are and have been dealing with the African and Asiatic Mohammedans. Possibly because of such favorable exposure in the Negro world, Islam continued to be a subject of interest among UNIA members in the United States after Garvey's deportation. In 1931, the Cleveland, Ohio division celebrated a Muhammad Day meeting. during the course of which they were addressed by Dr. Abad M.D. Stai, listed as being from Northeast Africa. The Ahmadiyya Muslims apparently did not succeed in building up a mass movement, but those Muslims who did were associated in some respects with the UNIA. It has been suggested that Elijah Muhammad, leader of the most successful of these Muslim organizations, the Nation of Islam, was a corporal in the uniformed ranks of the Chicago UNIA division. Others remember him as an active member of the Detroit UNIA. Muhammad did some of his early proselytizing in Chicago in 1933 in a night in 1933 in a UNIA Liberty Hall. He also apparently encouraged, or at least did not object, to having his movement cast in the role of successor to the Garvey movement. It also sometimes suggested that Timothy Drew, later known as Noble Drew Ali, founder in 1913 of the Moorish American Science Temples, acknowledged Garvey's influence on his movement. Drew's movement had for its major theological document a Holy Quran compounded of the teachings of the Bible, Marcus Garvey, and the Quran. Garvey was apparently eulogized at every meeting as the John Baptist of the movement. Indeed, so successful were the Moorish Americans at attracting Garvey's followers after his deportation that Philadelphian Garveyites actually wrote the United States authorities in 1935 asking for Garvey's return to combat the usurpation of Garvey by this group. The letter indicated that the Moorish Americans were enticing away UNI members under the pretense that they are doing Garvey's work as he no longer can return. The Moorish American leaders constantly reminded their converts of the injustices attendant upon Garvey's deportation and went so far as to claim authority from Garvey while denouncing Orthodox Garveyites as crooks who had lost contact with Garvey. The essence of religion for Garvey was the imparting of race pride, black nationalism, and self-reliance. In this light, his willingness to tolerate Islam and the attraction he had for Muslims are not difficult to understand. Indeed, even Harlem's black Jews could find a home in the UNIA, for the basic thrust of their doctrines boiled down in essentials to a similar message of race pride and self-reliance. And in religion, Garvey was concerned primarily with essentials. Christian and non-Christian religions, approved by Garvey, all simultaneously predicted and worked hard to effectuate a return of the former glories of the African race. The UNIA Catechism expressed it thus. What prediction made in the 68th Psalm in the 31st verse is now being fulfilled? Answer. Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. Question. What does this verse prove? Answer. That black men will set up their own government in Africa with rulers of their own race. And with that, I'm going to say peace. We just finished chapter 4. Next chapter is 5, and it's on history. I hope you're having a great day. I know it's a little windy out there today. Pardon my stuttering, and if there's like some distinction in and out as I speak. I'm really just getting up. I haven't even had a cup of coffee yet. Just brushed my teeth, washed my face, came on downstairs. Wanted to knock that out because I got several reasons that I need to do today. But you're going to have a great day. May your tomorrow be greater. Peace.